Despite his vow to end the fighting quickly, Trump has not laid out a concrete plan, and if he does, it is unlikely to bring much benefit to Ukraine. With Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election, Ukrainians are facing a near-certain change in U.S. policy as they come under increasing pressure from Russia. Russian forces have advanced significantly in recent months, seizing more territory and putting Ukraine in a very difficult position in the Donbas region. Many countries are stepping up diplomatic efforts to find a negotiated solution, but the prospects are slim. During the campaign, Trump criticized President Joe Biden's handling of the Ukraine crisis, warning that it increased the risk of World War III and that Kiev had cheated Washington to get billions of dollars in free weapons. He claimed he could resolve the conflict quickly and bring the two sides to the negotiating table, but he did not reveal how he would do it. "I can't give you those plans, because if I give them to you, I can't use them anymore," he said during the campaign. In fact, according to his allies, Trump has not prepared a specific peace plan, including how he would convince Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to sit down at the negotiating table. As in Trump's first term, different factions within the Republican Party will compete to influence the new administration's foreign policy. More traditional-minded allies like Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State who is running to lead the Pentagon, are likely to push for a solution that appears to offer little advantage to Russia. Other advisers, particularly Richard Grenell, a leading candidate to lead the State Department or National Security Advisor, may prioritize Trump's desire to end the conflict as soon as possible, even if that means forcing Ukraine to make significant territorial concessions. All of these proposals contrast with President Biden's approach of letting Ukraine decide when to begin peace talks. Proposals from Trump's advisers include freezing the fighting in place, recognizing Russia's pre-conflict status quo, and forcing Kiev to suspend its efforts to join NATO. One idea floating around inside Trump's transition office, detailed in unprecedented detail by three people close to the president-elect, would require Ukraine to pledge not to join NATO for at least 20 years. In return, the U.S. would continue to supply weapons to Ukraine to deter a future Russian invasion. Under that plan, the front line would essentially be fixed, and both sides would agree to a demilitarized zone about 800 miles long. Who would police the territory remains unclear, but one advisor said the peacekeeping force would not involve U.S. troops, nor would it come from a U.S.-funded international organization like the United Nations. "We could provide other support, but holding the guns would be a European task," said a member of Trump's transition team. "We're not going to send American troops to keep the peace in Ukraine, and we're not paying for it. Let the Poles, the Germans, the British, the French do it." The proposal echoes comments made by Vice President-elect J.D. Vance in a September interview when he suggested that a final deal between Ukraine and Russia could involve establishing a demilitarized zone that's heavily fortified so that Russia doesn't attack again. Russia would keep the territory it controls in Ukraine and be assured of Kiev's neutrality, he said. Ukraine is not going to join NATO, nor is it going to join some of those alliances, Vance said on the Sean Ryan Show podcast. Earlier this year, Keith Kellogg and Fred Fleitz, who served in Trump's first term, presented him with a plan that suggested holding off on supplying weapons to Ukraine until Kiev agreed to peace talks with Moscow. Ukraine could still try to regain lost territory, but it would have to be done through diplomatic negotiations. It is unclear which of these strategies Trump will pursue, but any attempt to initiate, let alone complete Russia-Ukraine peace talks, faces a number of challenges. First, Ukraine and Russia still have very different goals and little appetite for changing them. With Russian troops advancing slowly but steadily in Ukraine, the Kremlin has shown little inclination to negotiate and has indicated a willingness to continue the campaign until all its stated goals, including demilitarization of the Ukrainian government, are achieved. The goal of this particular military operation remains unchanged and will be achieved. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy head of Russia's Security Council, posted on X on November 6th, after learning of Trump's election. Trump's plan is likely to face strong opposition from some NATO allies in Europe, who see Russia's actions in Ukraine as a direct threat to them. Finnish Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen said she was not aware of any proposals from the Trump team, but said, "There will be no negotiations unless Ukraine agrees to negotiate and on their terms." Ukraine is heavily dependent on military and financial aid from the West, especially the United States. Therefore, the Ukrainian leadership may face much greater pressure to negotiate from Trump than the Russian president. However, if he agrees to negotiate, President Zelensky will face strong criticism from people who see territorial concessions as an act of surrender to Moscow. This is certainly not an easy choice. Trump has said that Ukraine's survival is important to the United States, but has repeatedly criticized Zelensky, calling him the greatest salesman for convincing the United States and Europe to deliver hundreds of billions of dollars in aid. This fiscal stance has many officials in Kiev worried that a Trump-led America could push for solutions that benefit Russia. President Zelensky congratulated President-elect Trump on June 11th, recalling their meeting in New York in September and praising his peace-through-strength approach to global affairs. The Ukrainian leader also said he had spoken to Trump by phone, adding that both agreed to maintain close dialogue and reasonable exchanges. At the same time, many NATO leaders were quick to congratulate Mr. Trump on his victory, covering up their concerns about European security and the alliance supporting Ukraine when he returned. Donald Trump quickly defeated Democratic candidate Kamala Harris in the presidential election on November 5th and is preparing to return to the White House as he had announced. Even before major news agencies called Mr. Trump the winner, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte congratulated the Republican candidate, seeing Trump win consecutively in battleground states. His leadership is once again key to keeping our alliance strong. I look forward to working with him to promote peace through NATO, Rutte said. The leader of France, a key NATO member in Europe, was also quick to congratulate President Donald Trump. "I am ready to work with Mr. Trump with the same respect and ambition as we did during those 4 years," French President Emmanuel Macron wrote on X on January 6th. "Our relationship is based on mutual trust and cooperation for greater peace and prosperity." British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called it a historic victory for Mr. Trump, while affirming the strength of the UK-US relationship. The enthusiastic welcome for Trump's return, which came before he declared victory and Harris conceded, appeared to be intended to mask NATO members' concerns about what the Trump administration might do to European security, especially as the Ukraine-Russia conflict escalates, observers say. Trump shocked NATO allies when he declared during his election campaign that the U.S. would not defend members who did not spend enough on defense, according to the 2% GDP commitment. During his first term, Trump repeatedly criticized allies on this issue, even threatening to withdraw from NATO if they did not contribute more. In an effort to appease Trump, NATO leaders have repeatedly credited the U.S. president-elect for making allies pay more attention to defense. The need has become more urgent as the Russia-Ukraine conflict flares up in early 2023. 23 of the 32 members have already met the target of spending 2% of GDP on defense, up from just 3 a decade ago. However, observers say Europe will have to work harder to ensure it can stand on its own 2 feet and satisfy Trump. "I expect a serious push to take European security and defense seriously and invest more in it," said a former senior NATO diplomat. The official also warned that Trump will continue to make comments that question America's commitment to NATO's collective defense clause, thereby weakening the alliance. For Ukraine, which is struggling in its war with Russia, the future picture could be bleaker. Mr. Trump has opposed U.S. unlimited support for Ukraine and pledged to quickly reach a deal with Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the conflict. If Mr. Trump decides to negotiate with Russia, the deal they make may not be based on values and principles, which could be disastrous for Ukraine and all of Europe, the former diplomat warned. Camille Grand, an analyst at the European Council on Foreign Relations, said there were two scenarios for the Trump administration's impact on NATO. One is that it will be like the first time, difficult but not catastrophic. The other is that we will face a different world of Trumpists who are skeptical about alliances and support for Ukraine, especially since his first term did not see conflict in Europe, he said. Many European officials agree that Ukraine is in a dangerous situation, but also believe that a Trump presidency could be beneficial to Kiev. They say Trump, who is volatile and uncompromising, could step up support for Ukraine if the Russian president demands too much and refuses to budge. Political analysts say Secretary General Rutte could be key to keeping NATO afloat amid concerns and doubts during Trump's tenure, as the former Dutch Prime Minister is seen as a smart and politically opportunist. Rutte is said to have had a good relationship with Trump in previous meetings and is highly regarded by the U.S. president-elect. At the 2018 NATO summit, when Trump hinted that he might pull the U.S. out of NATO over budgetary issues, Rutte praised the U.S. president for helping push Europe to invest more in defense, according to Dick Zandi, head of the Security and Defense Program at the Clingendale Institute in The Hague. Rutte gave Trump all the credit for that, and the U.S. president felt appreciated. Since then, Rutte has enjoyed a good relationship with the Trump White House, Zandi said. That is why some senior NATO officials are optimistic about a second Trump term, arguing that his America First stance could push Europe to get more serious about defending itself. Why should we be afraid of Trump? It will be difficult, but at least he will give us the impetus, said one diplomat who spoke on condition of anonymity. Others insist that the alliance has not only survived, but has become stronger as Trump pressures Europe to pay more. During his first term, our relationship focused on strengthening transatlantic security and preparing for the future. In an increasingly uncertain world, strong American leadership remains essential. Former NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg wrote on X, Belarus promises to nominate Trump for Nobel if he can end Ukraine conflict. President Lukashenko said Belarus would nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he can end the Ukraine conflict as promised. Trump promised to end the conflict in Ukraine and the Middle East. America is not Belarus. They can forget. But we hope that Trump will keep his word. If Trump does, Belarus will propose to award him the Nobel Peace Prize, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said on November 7th. Mr. Lukashenko added that not everything depends on Mr. Trump because peace requires the participation of both sides. Commenting on the results of the U.S. presidential election, Mr. Lukashenko said he did not care who won, although he believed that the U.S. was ready to have a new black president, but not ready to have a female president. The Nobel Peace Prize is awarded to individuals or organizations that have made significant contributions to promoting solidarity between nations, reducing or dismantling standing armed forces, and organizing and promoting peace conferences. Nominees include scholars, university professors, scientists, Nobel laureates, congressmen, etc. The Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to several U.S. presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt in 1906, Woodrow Wilson in 1920, Jimmy Carter in 2002, and Barack Obama in 2009.